The hospital room was quiet except for the hum of the four pump. My fingers shook as I unlocked the bank app on my phone, the taste of metal still clinging to my tongue from chemotherapy. At first, I thought the numbers were blurred from nausea, but no, the screen was clear. Thousands of dollars were leaving our joint account, transfer after transfer. The name beside each one, Vanessa Cole. My chest tightened. Vanessa wasn't a stranger. She was the wellness consultant my husband Daniel had hired to support me. Instead, she was draining me, and my mother's inheritance dry. My name is Laura Hayes. I was 42 when the diagnosis came, and everything I thought was steady in my life cracked open. Before cancer, I was someone who loved order. My days began at 6 sharp with the scent of fresh coffee filling the kitchen, the sound of birds outside the window, and the soft thud of Daniel's footsteps coming downstairs. We weren't rich, but our home, a modest 2-story house in the suburbs, always felt enough. I decorated it with little pieces of memory. My mother's lace curtains, photos from road trips, the quilt she had sewn for me years ago. I was a woman who thrived on the small, ordinary rituals of life. I folded laundry fresh from the dryer and inhaled its clean warmth. I took walks in the early morning when the world was still quiet, dew clinging to the grass. I wrote lists, grocery lists, to-do lists, goals for the week. They made me feel anchored. Daniel used to notice these things. In the early years of our marriage, he'd tease me for being the queen of routines but smile as he said it, and I'd catch him eating a cookie from a batch I baked, pretending he didn't like sweets. He was attentive then, soft-spoken, and the type of man who always reached for my hand when we crossed the street. I believed in him, in us. But when cancer arrived, that bond thinned. Chemo drained me of strength I didn't know could disappear so quickly. My skin felt fragile, my hair fell out in uneven patches, and the smell of cooking food, especially meat, often sent me rushing to the bathroom. My body was no longer my own, but a battlefield where nausea and fatigue won most days. Still, I clung to my rituals. I brewed Daniel's coffee in the mornings even when I couldn't drink it myself. I straightened the couch cushions so the living room would feel inviting when I returned from the hospital. I told myself that if I kept the shape of my old life intact, maybe I wouldn't lose it completely. Daniel's words began to change during this time. He no longer said, "We'll get through this together." Instead, he'd pat my arm distractedly before leaving for work, tie slightly crooked, phone buzzing with messages I wasn't meant to see. "Don't worry about the bills. Don't stress. Just focus on healing," he'd say. But his eyes rarely lingered on me anymore. And then there was Vanessa Cole. She entered our lives with Daniel's suggestion. "She's a wellness consultant," he said. "She'll help balance your mind and spirit. You need more than doctors and medicine, Laura." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Daniel was thinking of my comfort, my recovery. So I agreed. Vanessa arrived with her glossy hair, perfect smile, and voice that dripped with calm authority. She carried jars of herbal teas, vials of essential oils, and spoke of energy cleansing and guided meditation. But behind her polished exterior, something unsettled me. She laughed too loudly at Daniel's jokes, her hand lingering a fraction too long on his arm. When I mentioned it to myself in the mirror, I felt foolish. Was I jealous? Paranoid? The fog from chemo made me second-guess everything. But deep down, in that quiet place where instinct lives, I knew something was wrong. The house that once felt like my sanctuary began to feel staged, like I was a guest in my own marriage. Daniel seemed more alive when Vanessa was around, his eyes bright, his posture straight. With me, he was clipped, distant, always rushing. And though I tried to bury the suspicion, I could not ignore the way his phone screen lit up with her name late at night. I told myself I was imagining things. I had bigger battles to fight. But the truth was already alive in the walls of my home, seeping into every silence. The inheritance was never meant to be touched by anyone but me. It was the last piece of my mother that I carried with me, more than just numbers in a bank account. She had spent her whole life working in a small-town library, saving carefully, never once spending on herself in extravagant ways. When she passed, she left me a sum large enough to feel safe, enough for me to breathe knowing that if life collapsed, I would still have a foundation. I remember her final words about it. Her hand was thin, her nails brittle, but her grip was steady when she said, "Laura, This is for you. For whatever comes. Use it with care. Promise me. And I had promised. The money sat untouched for months, almost sacred. When my diagnosis came, I thought maybe I'd need it for treatment, or for help if things grew dire. But Daniel had been adamant. Don't worry, insurance will cover most of it. You rest. We'll figure it out. His words, at the time, sounded like comfort. But then the strange shifts began. It started small. I noticed Daniel was more protective of the finances than usual. He'd wave me off when I asked about bills. I've got it under control, he'd say. He encouraged me not to check the accounts. At first, I thought he was just shielding me from stress. After all, chemo left me exhausted. Maybe he was trying to be considerate. But then came Vanessa. At first, she was only supposed to visit once a week. Slowly, her presence multiplied. She arrived in the mornings with smoothies, pressed Daniel's shoulder with a familiarity that didn't feel professional, and used words like investment in healing whenever costs were mentioned. I didn't connect it to the inheritance at first. I thought Daniel was paying her small consulting fees, maybe a few $100s at most. But late one night, I overheard them in the kitchen. I had fallen asleep on the couch, the television humming low, and their voices woke me. She's fading fast, Vanessa whispered. Daniel's voice followed, low but clear. She doesn't even notice half of what's going on anymore. We just need to get through this year. My chest clenched. They were talking about me as though I wasn't alive, as though I was already a ghost haunting the room. She'll be gone soon, Vanessa continued. And then we can finally stop sneaking around. A silence followed, broken only by Daniel's sigh, then the scrape of his chair against the floor. I lay frozen under the blanket, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. The nausea in my stomach twisted into something darker. My husband, the man I had trusted for 16 years, wasn't just drifting away from me. He was planning a life that didn't include me at all. The betrayal came into sharper focus when I checked the account for the first time in months. My hand trembled as I logged in, the glow of the screen cutting through the dim bedroom. And there it was, transfer after transfer. $5,000, $10,000, even larger sums, all funneled into the same name, Vanessa Cole. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe these were business expenses? Medical fees? But the deeper I scrolled, the more the truth revealed itself. This wasn't just casual spending. This was systematic. Almost half of my mother's inheritance gone. The pit in my stomach deepened when I confronted Daniel gently the next morning. Hey, I asked, keeping my voice light. Have we had any big expenses lately? I noticed some transfers. His eyes flicked up, then away. Just covering things. You don't need to worry about it. What kind of things? Laura, please, he said sharply. The last thing you need is financial stress. Focus on getting better. But the sharpness in his voice was new. It wasn't protective, it was defensive. A few days later, Vanessa visited again, arms full of folders labeled wellness programs. She set them on the table, papers spilling. As I helped gather them, one sheet caught my eye before she snatched it back. A lease agreement. Not for her. For Daniel. A luxury apartment downtown. Signed and dated for the following month. The blood drained from my face. They weren't just taking my money. They were already building a life together. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and let the sobs tear through me. My body shook, weak from chemo but trembling more from the betrayal. The tiles beneath me were cold. The mirror above the sink reflecting a pale, fragile woman with hollowed cheeks and red eyes. A woman who had given her trust, her love, and her inheritance to a man who was already planning her absence. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the truth burning through me. My mother's gift was gone. My marriage was a facade. And the two people I was supposed to lean on, my husband and the woman hired to help me, were carving a future out of my slow decline. It was the night I stopped being afraid of cancer, because betrayal had become the sharper, more immediate wound. The final push came in the most ordinary moment, sitting in a hospital waiting room. It was late afternoon, the kind of time when the fluorescent lights buzz louder than the conversations around you. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and overbrewed coffee. My scarf itched against my bald scalp as I shifted in the plastic chair. For no reason at all, I opened the bank app again. Another transfer. $12,500. To Vanessa Cole. The noise of the waiting room dimmed to a distant hum. My hands went cold, my breath shallow. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't me imagining things through the fog of chemo. It was theft. It was betrayal. And it was still happening right under my nose. That evening, at home, I decided to test him. Daniel came in late, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. He loosened his tie, tossed his jacket over the chair, and kissed the top of my head with distracted routine. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Have you been moving money out of the joint account?" He froze for a second, then bent to untie his shoes. "Just covering expenses. Nothing for you to worry about." I pressed. "What kind of expenses?" His voice snapped, sharper than a knife. "Laura, don't do this. You need to focus on getting better. Don't pick fights over money." The word stung. Not because of what he said, but because of how quickly he turned my illness into a weapon against me. I let the conversation drop, but the wall between us grew taller, colder. A few days later, Vanessa appeared again, carrying her usual stack of folders and that unshakable smile. She smelled of lavender oil and expensive perfume. "Daniel thought I should check in," she said sweetly. "I brought some new wellness plans." I sat in the armchair, weak but alert, as she spread the folders across the coffee table. Papers slipped loose, fluttering onto the rug. I bent slowly to pick one up before she could stop me. It wasn't a wellness plan. It was a lease agreement for a downtown apartment. A luxury one, with marble countertops and rooftop views. The tenant name, Daniel Hayes. The move-in date, next month. For a moment, the room tilted. I looked at Vanessa, who reached quickly to snatch the paper, her smile faltering. "Oh, that's not supposed to be in there," she said too lightly. "Just some paperwork Daniel asked me to hold." My pulse thundered in my ears. I managed a small nod, handed it back, and excused myself to the bathroom. Behind the locked door, I braced against the sink and stared at my reflection. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, watery eyes. My heart beat so fast I thought I'd faint. He wasn't waiting until I died. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. My husband was preparing to move out, into a new life with her, while my body withered under chemo. That night, I lay in bed while Daniel showered. I heard his phone buzz on the nightstand. Against every instinct, I picked it up. Messages glowed across the screen. "Vanessa. Counting the days. Can't wait until it's just us. Daniel. Almost there. She's so weak, she barely notices anything. Vanessa. The apartment will be perfect. A fresh start." I set the phone down, my hand trembling. My stomach churned, but this wasn't chemo sickness. This was betrayal, raw and searing. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, towel slung over his shoulders, I pretended to be asleep. I listened to him climb into bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. I kept my breathing even while my mind raced. The next morning, he kissed my cheek quickly before leaving for work. "Don't push yourself today," he murmured. "I'll be late tonight." I nodded, hiding my fury. By then, the conflict wasn't just about the money. It wasn't even just about the affair. It was about the audacity, Daniel and Vanessa treating me like I was already gone, as though I were just a fading obstacle in their love story. They weren't waiting for my death. They were speeding it up, erasing me day by day, transaction by transaction. The betrayal had crossed a line, and in that quiet storm of realization, something inside me hardened. For weeks, I had let cancer define what battles I could and could not fight. But this betrayal, this theft of my mother's inheritance, my dignity, my trust, ignited something deeper. I was still alive, and as long as I was alive, I would not let them write me out of my own story. The anger came first, hot, sharp, almost unbearable. But underneath it, buried deep, was something else: resolve. One morning, while tying the hospital band snugly around my wrist for another chemo session, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My skin was pale, lips dry, but my eyes, they burned. For weeks, I had seen a victim staring back. Now, for the first time, I saw a fighter. I remembered my mother's voice, the day she handed me her savings account details before she died. This is for you, Laura. Not for anyone else. Use it to rebuild when the world feels unkind. That money was sacred. It wasn't just numbers in a bank account. It was her legacy, her last embrace. Daniel and Vanessa had put their hands on it like it was theirs to claim. No, not anymore. I started small. While Daniel was out, I opened my laptop and began pulling records. At first, it was dizzying. The transactions blurred, endless transfers with coded descriptions. But I forced myself to focus. Line by line, I pieced it together. Money drained into Vanessa's consultancy account, then moved into shell accounts under Daniel's name. And then the apartment lease. It wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. The realization steadied me. It gave my exhaustion a purpose. Every drip in the hospital, every dizzy spell in the night, it no longer felt like slow defeat. It felt like sharpening steel. I bought a small notebook, plain black, and began recording everything. Dates, times, amounts, copies of emails and text messages forwarded quietly to a new, hidden account. When Vanessa visited, I forced myself to smile, to let her think I was still too weak to notice. When Daniel kissed me goodbye each morning, I kissed him back, as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was building a case. There were nights when the fatigue crushed me flat against the mattress, when nausea curled me into a ball. In those moments, it would have been so easy to give in, to let them win, to let myself fade away quietly. But then I'd hear Vanessa's words echo in my head. She's so weak she barely notices anything. And something primal would rise in me. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. Daniel's growing detachment wasn't just emotional distance, it was strategy. He scheduled his life around Vanessa, not me. He was careful, but not careful enough. His cologne lingered even when he claimed he was working late. Receipts appeared in his jacket pocket, dinners, jewelry, hotel stays. The betrayal cut deeper each time, but instead of breaking me, it fueled me. The sicker my body felt, the clearer my mind became. One afternoon, during chemo, I overheard two nurses talking about a patient who had taken her husband to court while still in treatment. She said fighting back kept her alive. One of them whispered. I clutched that sentence like a lifeline. Fighting back could keep me alive. That night, I called an old friend, Marissa, a lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years. My voice trembled as I explained, haltingly, what I'd discovered. She listened in silence. When I finished, she said only this. Laura, gather everything. Every shred of evidence. And don't let them see you coming. Her words became my mantra. I hid flash drives in the lining of my chemo bag. I stored copies of documents in a locked drawer at the hospital, where Daniel never set foot. Every time I pressed save or snapped a photo of a receipt, my veins surged with more than medication. They surged with purpose. Still, there were moments of fear. Nights when Daniel rolled over and draped an arm across me, and I wondered if he could hear the thunder of my heart. Afternoons when Vanessa's eyes lingered a beat too long, as if she suspected something. But fear didn't stop me anymore. Fear sharpened me. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of ginger tea, I opened the bank app again. Another transfer. $10,000. Gone. And instead of despair, I felt a steady calm. Because this time I wasn't helpless. This time I was ready. I closed the app, closed the notebook, and whispered to the empty room. You think I'm too weak to notice. But I'm watching everything. And when I'm ready, you'll feel it. That was the moment the inner fire truly took hold. Not a flicker, not a spark, but a blaze. Once the fire was lit, I knew strategy had to follow. Rage alone wouldn't save my mother's legacy or me. I made a plan. Document, build, and wait. Patience would be my weapon. Every morning, after Daniel left for work, I sat at the dining table with my notebook, my laptop, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I combed through his emails, the credit card statements, even his calendar. I learned to move like a shadow, quiet, invisible, deliberate. I discovered that Vanessa's consultancy was more than a front. She and Daniel had built an entire pipeline. Money drained from our joint account into her business, then funneled into offshore savings. It wasn't just cheating. It was theft. Fraud. A crime. And yet, as clear as it was, proving it wouldn't be simple. I began working closely with Marissa, my lawyer friend. Late at night, while Daniel snored softly beside me, I whispered into the phone, updating her about the new files I'd uncovered. She coached me. Always think like them. What would Daniel want to hide most? That's where you look. I did look. And sometimes, what I found nearly broke me. Jewelry receipts that weren't for me. Hotel reservations in cities I'd never visited. Vanessa's name on lease agreements. The intimacy of their betrayal was as brutal as the theft itself. But there were setbacks too. One afternoon, as I scanned documents into a hidden folder, Daniel walked in earlier than expected. My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped the scanner. "What are you doing?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Looking up treatment options." He stared for a moment too long. I held my breath, waiting for suspicion. Then he kissed my forehead and left. I collapsed into the chair, drenched in sweat. That night, I barely slept, the fear gnawing at me. One mistake, one wrong move, and everything would unravel. Another time, I tried to pull a bank statement from his office drawer. But the lock was changed. He was tightening control. He was watching too. Marissa reminded me. This is a long game. You can't catch everything in one strike. Take what you can piece by piece. Truth builds slowly, but when it stands, it's unshakable. Still, the long game tested me. My body weakened under chemotherapy, nausea dragging me to the bathroom floor some days. On those days, my notebook sat untouched. The evidence paused. And in the silence, doubts crept in. What if I was too late? What if they drained everything before I could act? What if I never lived long enough to expose them? But then I'd open the folder, see the neat rows of files, the photographs, the transfers marked in red ink. Proof. Each one a reminder that I wasn't powerless. One night, I overheard Daniel on the phone. His voice was low, urgent. "She doesn't suspect anything. She's too sick to notice." I clenched my fists under the blanket. He thought he was safe. The very next day, I copied the last 3 months of bank statements onto a flash drive. I hid it inside my chemo bag, right under the sterile gloves. Daniel would never think to look there. But Vanessa grew sharper too. When she visited, her eyes scanned the room, as though she could sense the shift in me. Once, she leaned closer and said almost sweetly, "Laura, you should really rest more. You're exhausting yourself with little things." Her words chilled me. Did she know? That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, the fear pressing hard against my ribs. The fire inside me dimmed for a moment. Maybe I was in over my head. But the next morning, when I opened my notebook and saw the evidence lined up like soldiers on a battlefield, my resolve returned. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about survival, about dignity, about truth. I told myself, setbacks are just pauses, not endings. And so I pressed on. Every setback became a lesson. Every close call a warning. I learned patience. I learned silence. I learned to wait for the moment when the truth could no longer be denied. And though Daniel and Vanessa thought they were winning, what they didn't know was this. Every move they made, every dollar they stole, every lie they whispered, was becoming part of the case I was building against them. The day of exposure arrived quietly. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting in the streets, just precision. I had spent weeks preparing with Marissa. Every bank transfer, lease agreement, and hidden contract was compiled. Flash drives, printed documents, audio recordings of conversations between Daniel and Vanessa plotting my removal from their lives. They were all ready. In the courtroom, the air smelled of polished wood and disinfectant. My hands were steady, surprisingly calm. Despite the months of chemo that had left my body fragile, Daniel entered, neatly dressed, confidence in his stride. Vanessa followed, smile slightly forced, perfume thick. They thought they were untouchable. Marissa and I approached the bench. I handed over the documents. The judge flipped through the files, eyebrows raised. I watched Daniel's face pale as each transaction, each hidden account, and each recorded plan played out. His voice trembled when he tried to speak. "Your Honor, please. It's not what it looks like," he stammered. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of evidence pressing down. Vanessa's cheeks flushed red as the recordings were played. Her laughter, once so polished and confident, sounded grotesque now, echoing in the room like a confession. Step by step, the truth unfolded. Every lie Daniel had told about insurance, medical bills, and expenses was exposed. Every hidden transfer to Vanessa's account. Every plot to isolate and silence me. The judge looked at Daniel, then Vanessa, and finally at me. The evidence is clear. You have committed embezzlement and attempted financial fraud. Furthermore, the deliberate manipulation of your spouse constitutes a breach of trust and attempted exploitation. Daniel sank into his chair, unable to meet my gaze. Vanessa's hands shook in her lap. When the sentencing came, it was precise and unyielding. Daniel, 3 years in prison. Vanessa, 2 years. Both required to repay the funds they had stolen. The room buzzed with murmurs as the reality sank in. Justice wasn't theatrical. It was meticulous, undeniable. Walking out of the courtroom, the weight that had pressed against my chest for months finally lifted. The sunlight outside felt warmer than it had in years. My body still ached from treatment, but my spirit felt unshakable. They had underestimated me, thought my illness made me weak. But it had not. I hadn't taken revenge with anger or humiliation. I had taken it with truth. Every paper, every recording, every patient step had led to a justice they couldn't deny. And that, more than anything, was my triumph. As we left, Daniel and Vanessa were led away in handcuffs. Their eyes searched for me one last time. I met them calmly, with a quiet smile. They had stolen from me, yes, but they could never take back what I had rebuilt inside myself. My dignity, my clarity, my strength. For the first time in months, I felt free. The weeks following the courtroom felt unreal. Daniel and Vanessa were gone, physically removed, but their absence echoed in every corner of the house. The spaces they had occupied, once filled with tension, now felt quieter, freer. I walked through the room slowly, letting my fingers brush over the familiar surfaces. The quilt from my mother, the stack of well-worn novels on the shelf, the coffee mugs neatly lined in the cupboard. Each small item was a reminder that I still belonged here. Recovery, both physical and emotional, became my daily practice. The chemo treatments were still taxing, but I approached them with a renewed sense of purpose. I began to notice the small victories again. Waking up without nausea for a few hours, enjoying a cup of tea without feeling weak, laughing genuinely at the stories my friends shared over phone calls. I even started to walk again outside, letting the sunlight hit my face without feeling guilty about the world continuing while I fought to reclaim it. Nature became my confidant. The gentle sway of trees, the songs of birds, the crispness of morning air. In those moments, I felt a sense of control I hadn't known for months. The inheritance, once tainted by betrayal, was restored. The accounts were recovered, and I made careful plans to ensure it would remain secure. It was no longer just money. It was a symbol of my resilience and the life my mother had entrusted to me. I allowed myself to invest in experiences I had postponed. A pottery class I'd dreamed about, a small weekend trip to the mountains, even a quiet dinner with friends without worry about lingering debts or hidden schemes. One evening, I sat by the window, tea in hand, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Silence enveloped me, but it was no longer heavy. It was comforting. I reflected on the months of betrayal, the sleepless nights, the quiet fury, and the painstaking work it took to reclaim what was mine. Each memory carried its sting, but also its lesson. I had learned to trust my instincts, to observe carefully, and to act decisively. I reached for my notebook, now filled with documentation and notes from my journey. I read through the pages, a quiet smile spreading across my face. It wasn't just evidence of wrongdoing. It was a testament to my endurance, my meticulousness, my refusal to let injustice define me. Friends began to notice a change in me. They commented on my calm, measured presence, my newfound confidence. I realized I no longer needed validation from Daniel or Vanessa, or anyone who had tried to diminish me. My self-worth was intact, stronger than ever. At night, I would sometimes feel a flash of the old pain. The sense of loss, the sharp sting of betrayal, but it passed more quickly each time. I allowed myself to acknowledge it without letting it control me. I began writing again, pouring thoughts and emotions into stories, letters, and reflections. It became a quiet ritual, a way to process the past and embrace the future. Even as my body healed, my mind grew sharper. I saw the world with more clarity, with a stronger understanding of human motives and resilience. The lesson was unmistakable. Betrayal could wound deeply, but truth, patience, and courage could heal and restore. And most importantly, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The life I had lost to fear and suspicion was returning. Not exactly the same, but better, stronger, free. I no longer measured my days by what Daniel or Vanessa had done, but by the choices I made, the boundaries I set, and the joy I allowed myself to embrace. The home that had once been a stage for deceit now felt like a sanctuary again, filled with my presence, my strength, and my reclaimed dignity. Sitting by the window, sunlight spilling across the floor, I finally understood what survival meant. It wasn't just about beating cancer. It wasn't simply about recovering stolen money or watching Daniel and Vanessa face consequences. Survival was quieter, subtler. It was reclaiming the pieces of yourself that others tried to steal. I thought back to the first time I discovered the transfers, to the panic that had left my hands shaking, to the nights I lay awake plotting, terrified of every misstep. I remember staring at my pale reflection in the bathroom mirror, thinking that betrayal had left a wound deeper than chemotherapy. But the truth is, those nights of fear became the forge in which my resilience was made. Every step I took, from recording their lies to handing the evidence over to Marissa, from enduring chemotherapy while secretly planning justice, taught me something essential. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers through patience, careful observation, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. I learned that people can betray, can manipulate, can underestimate you, but they cannot erase the strength you carry within. My mother's inheritance, once stolen, became more than money. It became a symbol of endurance, a reminder that life's value is in the courage to reclaim it. Now my mornings are quiet, but intentional. I breathe, I walk, I notice the small details: the scent of coffee, the rustle of leaves, the soft hum of the city outside. I carry no hatred for those who tried to break me, only a calm certainty that justice, slow, meticulous, undeniable, was enough. The greatest revenge is not in their fall, but in your rise. I did not watch them suffer in glee. I rebuilt myself, body and soul. I reclaimed my home, my finances, and most importantly, my dignity. And as the sunlight warms my face, I finally feel whole. Betrayal had tried to steal my life, but I took it back, quietly, firmly, and without losing myself. I am Laura Hayes. I survived. I endured. And I rose stronger than before.